you might have seen a piece of advertising, maybe even a trailer for a new Amazon Prime show. It's an adult animated superhero show called Invincible, and it's actually based on a comic of the same name that ran for 144 issues. You might be thinking, why should I care? Well, today, let me talk to you about the best superhero comic in the universe. So let's get into the premise of the story. So Mark Grayson is a high school senior. He has a penchant for zombie movies and for comic books. He has to deal with, everyday problems like acne, girls, high school drama, and oh yeah, developing superpowers, because his dad, Omni-Man, is actually the most powerful superhero in a world saturated with capes and cows. Omni-Man, or as he's known to his family, Nolan, is basically like a Burt Reynolds Superman, or basically think of the Henry Cavill Superman from Justice League, but instead of CGIing his mustache away, they just kind of CGI'd some grey hair and wrinkles. But essentially he tells his son that he was sent by a benevolent race called the Viltrumites to come and be a protector of Earth. And think of Mark as a kind of culmination of Spider-Man and Superman. Except I think Mark would actually find those names kinda stupid. Finally, Mark gets his powers, and he discovers this by throwing a trash bag from where he works at the Burger Mart accidentally all the way to London. He discovers, I am a superhero now, and he dons a super suit, he joins the team, and basically he fights crime and crushes through homework, just like this guy. Basically, we follow him as he matures and as he discovers what it means to become invincible. So let's have a quick look into the history of the Invincible comic. Invincible was first published by Image Comics in 2003. And basically, Image Comics was formed by a bunch of comic book creators from the popular Marvel and DC brands who decided that they wanted to make their own independent, creator-owned comic books, which they could have creative liberties over. So basically, Invincible was created by Robert Kirkman, famous for creating and writing the Walking Dead comic, and also, far more importantly, the creator of Science Dog, as well as his then sleeping on his studio's floor associate, Corey Walker. Invincible was meant to be the head of a new lineup of superhero comics from Image, which it was kind of the Mark Wahlberg of that situation, let's just say.
What? No.
So the vast run of Invincible spanned 15 years and 144 issues, all of which Robert Kirkman himself wrote. Corey Walker did the art for the first 7 issues, and then returned later on after handing off the role to Ryan Ottley, who's now one of the biggest up-and-coming comic book artists. He took over for Spider-Man at one point. The reason why Invincible means so much to me is the time in which I found it. I found it through The Walking Dead, like many other people, and I found it during a part of my life. I was 18 and my dad had recently passed away from cancer, so the book spoke to me in a very personal way, and it felt like it was written for me, even though I know it wasn't. The thing that drew me to Invincible was the relationship between Nolan and Mark. It kind of mirrored the relationship between Rick Grimes and Carl Grimes in The Walking Dead, except I feel like this was more for me, for a son, and not for a father. During this dark period of my life, every single time I read Invincible, I felt good. I felt at least something, and I was excited to see what would happen next. I stopped becoming this world that I would tune into and became a world I could imagine living in. It's not just a good superhero story, not just a good comic book, it's a really good coming-of-age story. It feels genuine, and I love it. And so here's some reasons why I think you might love it too. So one of the best things about having a creator-owned comic book is that basically, besides that shuffle I mentioned at the start, the creative team of Invincible doesn't really change that much through the entire run. This is very rare compared to Marvel Comics and Detective Comics where basically they have a retcon boot every few years that basically diminishes, sometimes even wipes out all of the previous work done for that character. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing, but it's also kind of a jumping on point for new people so that they don't have to, read all these like tie-ins and crossovers and all these weird side stories just to get the full essential fucking story like I did, so that's why I went to work in a comic book store. While I was writing this video, I decided to talk to the Invincible subreddit to hear their perspectives about what drew them into the comic. This is what Morgan had to say.
So what really got me hooked on Invincible was seeing it come up constantly in recommendations from people online who said it was one of the best independent books, and it was a great independent book to read if you're frustrated with the lack of change in comics at Marvel and DC. And at that point, I was frustrated with the lack of change in comics because things like One More Day at Marvel and the New 52 at DC signaled to me at least that they weren't interested in the character aging, they weren't interested in the character getting married or staying married, they weren't interested in characters having children, they weren't interested in the characters retiring and then passing the legacy onto their sidekick or a legacy hero. They wanted the characters to stay the same as they'd always been, same age, same everything, and that frustrated me because I wanted the characters to grow and change. So I decided I would take a break from main comics from the big two for a while, but I still want to read comics, and I kept seeing this name come up over and over: Invincible, Invincible, Invincible. And eventually I found out it was written by the same person who wrote The Walking Dead, Robert Kirkman, and I loved The Walking Dead, so I decided to give Invincible a chance.
So what Morgan and I were discussing is what creative genius, what legendary cameo maker Stan Lee called the illusion of change. Basically what this means is that no matter how close a superhero comes to self-destruction, comes to becoming altered for good or for bad, there's like a reset button, like a fucking Men in Black selfie stick that wipes the audience's mind. That is a way to preserve the core principles and tenets of who and what that character is. This helps to increase the longevity of a character in the public conscience. When you think of Superman, you think of, the traditional white dude, curly hair, blue onesie, big red cape, S on his chest that stands for like so damn OP it's not even funny anymore. You don't really think about these people. Because Invincible is creator owned, because it's independent, Kirkman and the Scooby Gang, they can basically do whatever the f they want with that book and use the superhero tropes that you're used to as a jumping off point. Mark doesn't discover his powers after being bitten by a radioactive spider or getting hit by toxic waste. He's literally throwing a trash bag and is like,
Nice.
as it flies around the world. When he's talking to his mum at dinner, Mark is talking about how children were made into organic bombs, and his dad is talking about being stuck in an interdimensional portal and he couldn't get out for months, and his mum's reply is, "That's nice, do we want to have dessert now?" It's kind of crazy. So this is where I get into the first discussion of some light spoilers. It happens early on in the book, but I totally understand if you want to skip. There's time codes in the description below so that you can skip to after this section. So what has this got to do with the illusion of change? So early on in the Invincible comic, there's a superhero team that are introduced called the Guardians of the Globe. Basically Diet Justice League, Earth's slightly shit heroes, and essentially these characters are introduced, they all get a one-page thing about who they are, what they're about, what they're doing, and then they're all recalled back to their superhero base, where, spoiler warning, and I mean spoiler warning, they are fucking slaughtered, every single one of them, and yeah, that's it, they're dead now. That's the status quo of the comic now. Events in Invincible have real repercussions on the characters, on the world, even the tone that the story takes. And sometimes in Invincible, the hero fails. Sometimes they're wrong, sometimes even catastrophically wrong. Even though some comic books try to impart to us some version of this, I don't think any of them in all of the universes of Cape Crusaders do it as well as Invincible does, as the story continues. So here's Morgan again, discussing why he loves Invincible.
Before I read it, people told me that, if the first two volumes don't really pull you in, keep reading till that third volume, because that's where this only mean that, because right away I just completely loved it. The characters were great, the humour was so funny, the plot is just brilliant, the designs for the characters as well are just so amazing. Corey Walker just hit out of the park for them. And one thing that I loved about Invincible was the relatability of its characters. Like, Mark is kind of like looking in the mirror for a lot of us at one point in our lives. You know, he works a crappy fast food job that he hates. You know, girls in school don't really notice him. He's always getting hassled to make sure he makes it to school on time, and he hands in that work. In a way, Mark really is like us at one point in our lives, and I love that. So I decided to keep reading, and then when I got to that third volume, everything I thought I knew about comics changed. That volume flipped everything I thought I knew about comics on its head. It just took whatever knowledge I had of comics and threw it out the window. Reading that volume, I feel like a beginner in comics. I feel like I knew absolutely nothing, given how it just changed everything. And after that point, I was even more hooked. I knew as soon as an issue of Invincible came out, I had to read it. And that is exactly what I did, because I absolutely was hooked from that point on.
So what he was talking about there, we're actually going to cover later in like a spoiler discussion. There's going to be a warning, there's going to be codes in the description, so you can skip it, so don't worry. Let's go back into why you should read it though. So one of the things about Invincible is it subverts your expectations of superheroes. Whether you've seen a few Marvel movies or whether you've read hundreds of comics from major publications, but that doesn't matter. Invincible at its heart is this emotional, heartfelt story. It's a coming of age story about a nerdy ass teenager with regular issues as well as superpowered ones. And the comedy in this book is fantastic. Debbie Grayson, his mom, she is this like desensitized mom who like sees the world of superheroes but doesn't really care. She just wants to be a good mom. And some of the names are the punniest shit I've ever heard. Like Rexplode, like Atom Eve, Duplicate. This motherfucker is just called Robot. I love that. They're so lazy, but I love it. Now, that doesn't really feel like there's any throwaway scenes in Invincible. There'll be a small event that happens near the start, like for instance Mark throwing a trash bag, and this will be referenced later on. Like for instance, this trash bag is now worshipped by a cult that think it's come from a sky god. But don't be fooled by the colourful, whimsical nature of this book either. It's incredibly violent, and this is mainly in part due to the art of Ryan Ottley especially, and Corey Walker at the start. And also don't forget Bill Crabtree, who does amazing contrasting colour between like the blood and the costumes of the superheroes. Look at this guy. He's called Battle Beast. He's like some lion-headed dude with like a mace and some Padawan braids. Look at this fight right here. This is some of the coolest shit I have ever seen in my entire life. Now, some gigantic spoilers are coming up. If you don't know, this is that volume 3 stuff we were talking about earlier, issue 11 of the comics, and it basically involves someone very close to Invincible. It's a major plot point, but it happens early. So if you don't want to know, please leave. There's going to be time codes in the description. Just wait for it, because it's going to be early on in the show. It's early on in the comics. If you don't know it, just wait to hear it. So you remember how at the start of the comic, we get Nolan talking to Mark about his origins. He was sent by the Viltrumites, he's there to protect the Earth, yada yada yada. Remember that superhero team, you know, Diet Justice League? Yeah, well, yeah, he murdered all of them. And basically it's his mission to come to Earth to conquer it, and he decided now his son has some powers, it'll be a good time because he could help him wipe out the humans. So yeah, so the Immortal comes back and Nolan fucks him up again, no surprise there, but this time Invincible is there to see it, and Omni-Man is all,
Oh, hi Mark.
you know, Omni-Man's evil and Invincible isn't evil, so boom, giant cataclysmic fight. Invincible is nearly pulverized to death, and he gets out one small sentence before the fight ends abruptly. So while I was talking to the subreddit, one of the voice clips I got was from Maurice here, and he's going to talk about this scene briefly.
The moment where I became hooked on Invincible was during the last panel of the fight between Mark and his dad, Omni-Man. And when Omni-Man was just tearing him down and telling him how he's gonna outlive all of his friends and how he has nothing and what's he gonna have at the end of the world. And Mark just says, "I would have had you, Dad." And that's the exact moment that I was hooked on Invincible. It was the first time that a comic book has ever made me genuinely cry. Not just tear up, but sob. And to me, it really solidified what Invincible was all about. The struggles of maintaining the relationships in your life, whether it's your family or your friends, your loved ones, right? There's always constantly going to be struggles that test those relationships. And that's what Invincible is about to me.
Invincible is an incredible balancing act between the intense emotions of a family drama, between the vibrant bursts of brutal action, and really a story about not just what it means to be an invincible superhero, but about what it means to be human. Mark's core story for me is about him coming to terms with his weakness, with his vulnerability. He can't save everyone. He can't rescue every relationship that doesn't work out. No matter how powerful you are, sometimes you just lose. But no matter how dire the situation, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, Invincible will power through it, and he will fight because he has to protect people, and he has to fight for those he loves, because more than anything to Invincible, family matters. Thank you all for watching the video this far. I'm so excited to see if any of you get interested. If I can make one person watch the show, I'll be very happy. I absolutely love it, and me and many others from the community really want to get new people into this comic because we feel like it's so underrated, or maybe not even known about by a lot of people. Thank you for watching. I hope this wasn't too painful because it's my first YouTube video. The first 3 episodes of the show are out today on Amazon Prime. The comic is also amazing, obviously. There's links in the description for other stuff you can check out, including my Twitter, some interviews, some articles I read. Those can be a bit spoilery, so be careful there. I will be back soon, boys. And as always, starting from now, stay hopeful. See you soon.